Curiosity. It's often called a virtue, a drive to understand the world. But for some, it's a door that should never be opened. Meet Daniel. He wasn't your average fan. He didn't just listen to podcasts. He studied them. He lived for the why behind the most gruesome crimes. His room was a shrine to the macabre. Maps, court transcripts, and endless digital archives of humanity's darkest impulses. One night, a thought entered his mind like a virus. What does it actually feel like? Not just to see it, but to do it? It started as a hypothetical experiment. He thought he could handle the darkness. He thought he was just a scientist of the soul. But curiosity is a predator. It demands more than just thoughts. It demands action. Daniel began to plan his own case study. He didn't want a motive. No money, no revenge, no passion. He wanted a vacuum. A murder for the sake of knowing what it felt like to kill. He used every trick he'd learned from thousands of hours of true crime consumption. He knew how to avoid the cameras, how to mask his scent, how to vanish. The tools were simple, unremarkable, things that wouldn't draw attention if he were stopped. But in his hands, they were instruments of a grim curiosity. For 3 weeks, he watched. He learned the rhythms of the neighborhood. He became a ghost in the periphery of a normal life. Tuesday night, 2:14 a.m. The world was asleep, unaware that one man's curiosity had finally reached its boiling point. He didn't feel fear. He felt a strange, cold clarity. He was no longer a fan. He was a participant. The lock gave way with a sickening ease. Daniel stepped into the silence of a stranger's hallway. The air smelled of vanilla and clean laundry. His heart was steady, too steady. He realized then that he wasn't a normal man. He was someone who could truly do this. Every step was a calculated risk. Every breath was held. He moved toward the bedroom at the end of the hall, the epicenter of his experiment. This was it. The moment where theory becomes reality, where the fan becomes the killer. Curiosity had led him to this threshold. What happened in that room was quick. It was clinical. It was exactly as he had imagined, yet entirely different. The sound wasn't like the podcasts. The smell was more metallic than the books described. The reality was heavy. He left as quietly as he had arrived. No alarm was raised. The neighborhood continued to sleep, unaware of the void he'd left behind. Back in his room, Daniel sat in the dark. The curiosity was gone, replaced by a new question. What happens when they find out? The sun rose on a city that didn't know it was missing someone, but the clock was already ticking for Daniel. By noon, the sirens began. The fans of true crime were already theorizing online, not knowing that the killer was one of them. Daniel watched his own crime become the latest trend. He felt a strange pride. He had created the perfect mystery, or so he thought. But even the most dedicated fans miss the smallest details. And in the world of forensics, curiosity isn't the only thing that leaves a mark. The investigation was just beginning, and Daniel was about to learn that being a fan of the hunt is very different from being the prey. Next time, the investigation begins. Don't let your curiosity get the best of you. The silence of the suburbs didn't last. By 8 a.m., the vanilla-scented hallway Daniel had walked through was a cordoned-off vault of secrets. Daniel didn't go to work. He sat in his sanctuary, watching the feeds. He was no longer just a listener, he was the lead story. He felt like the director of a blockbuster. Enter Detective Sarah Vance. She was known for her intuition, a bloodhound for the details that killers think they've hidden, and this case had her full attention. Vance knew this wasn't a crime of passion. There was no struggle, no robbery, no history between the victim and any known enemies. It was a vacuum. That was Daniel's masterpiece. He'd created the perfect crime, a motiveless murder. He thought the police were chasing ghosts. But Vance didn't believe in ghosts. Online, the true crime community Daniel once called home was exploding. Every detail was being dissected, and Daniel was right there in the comments, steering the conversation. But in the lab, Vance's team had found something Daniel hadn't planned for. A single dark hair, not from the victim, recovered from the primary crime scene. It was a mistake, a microscopic failure in an otherwise perfect plan. Daniel realized it the moment the news mentioned forensic breakthroughs in the case. The sanctuary of his room began to feel like a cage. Every siren in the distance felt like it was coming for him. Every knock on a neighbor's door was a heartbeat skipped. Vance wasn't looking for a criminal. She was looking for a student. Someone who knew the tropes. Someone who was trying too hard to be invisible. Daniel began to scrub his history. The podcasts, the forums, the search history. But curiosity leaves a digital trail that never truly disappears. Cyber investigators were already tracing the source of the most insightful comments on the forums. The net was closing, one packet of data at a time. Then it happened. Not a siren, not a flash of light, just 3 steady professional knocks on a door down the street. The investigation had arrived in Daniel's neighborhood. He stood in his hallway, heart hammering against his ribs. Was it a routine check, or did they already have the hair sample? Daniel was no longer the director. He was the subject. Vance had a hunch. The killer wouldn't be hiding in the shadows. He'd be watching. He'd be the one who couldn't look away from the fire he'd started. The hair was at the lab. The results were hours away. The perfect crime was about to meet the imperfect reality of biology. He couldn't stay inside. He had to know. He opened his door just as a car pulled up to the curb. It wasn't the police. It was something else. Next time, the confrontation, when the curiosity killer meets his match. Stick around, the hunt is just getting started. Daniel stood frozen on his porch. The police were down the street, but this was something else. A predator he hadn't planned for. A text message appeared on his phone from an unknown number. "I saw you. I know why you did it." The words were a physical blow. Someone else was watching Daniel. It wasn't a witness. It was a peer, another fan of the macabre who had been tracking the same perfect crime Daniel was trying to commit. A shadow watcher. Daniel had searched for police cameras, for doorbell cams, but he hadn't looked for the enthusiasts, the ones who set up their own surveillance for research. The curiosity that had driven Daniel to kill was now being turned against him. He was no longer the hunter. He was the most interesting case study on the internet. The stranger wanted a meeting, an exchange of expertise. Daniel had no choice. To refuse was to surrender to the badge. To go was to walk into the unknown. 3 a.m. The industrial district was a graveyard of cold steel. Daniel arrived, his heavy wrench still in his bag. This time, it wasn't for curiosity, it was for survival. A voice echoed through the rafters, calm, knowledgeable. It sounded like the podcasts Daniel had listened to for years. The stranger knew every detail of Daniel's kill. "You were good," the voice said, "but you were arrogant. You assumed you were the only one interested in the void." The stranger held all the cards. The stranger didn't want money. He wanted to watch. He wanted Daniel to become his special project, a collaborative experiment in the art of the kill. Daniel felt a wave of nausea. He was a monster, yes, but he was his own monster. Being someone else's pawn was a fate worse than prison. The choice was taken from him. The police hadn't been chasing ghosts. They've been tracking the stranger. The watcher was the one they really wanted. Vance had played a longer game than Daniel could have imagined. She'd used the watcher to lead her to the participant. 2 birds with 1 forensic stone. The cuffs were cold. The reality was finally here. Daniel looked at the stranger, now revealed to be just a man, terrified and small. The mystery was gone. "Curiosity," she whispered as she walked past him. "It's what gets everyone in the end." Daniel's experiment had reached its final clinical conclusion, but the story doesn't end with an arrest. The interrogation is where the true horror begins. The why is finally going to be put on record. Are you ready to hear the truth? Every bloody detail? Daniel is ready to talk, and he has one more surprise for Detective Vance. Next time, the confession. The experiment isn't over yet. Stay curious. The room was cold, not just the temperature, but the atmosphere. Daniel sat under the hum of the lights, the silence more punishing than any shout. Detective Vance didn't slam files down. She sat quietly, placed a digital recorder on the table, and looked at Daniel with a look of genuine interest. She knew his weakness. "I've listened to the same podcasts, Daniel," she said. "I know the cases you studied. I know why you think you're different. You want to tell me about the experiment?" Daniel felt a surge of validation. Finally, someone who understood the why. The terror began to melt away, replaced by an intoxicating need to be understood. He started from the beginning. Not the planning, but the feeling. The emptiness. The sense that life was a movie he was watching through a dirty window. "I wanted to feel real," he whispered. "I wanted to know if the sound of a breaking heart was as loud as they say in the audiobooks. Curiosity wasn't just a hunger." He described the entry with pride. The vanilla scent, the staircase. He spoke about the victim not as a person, but as a data point in his grand curiosity. "The hair," he said, his voice tightening. "I knew it the second I read the report, a failure of focus, a moment of humanity that cost me my invisibility." Vance didn't interrupt, she let him talk. She knew that for men like Daniel, the confession is the final act of the performance, the audience he always wanted. But then, Daniel said something that made the air in the room vanish. "You think this was the first time? You think curiosity is satisfied with just one sample?" Daniel confessed to a murder from 3 years ago, a cold case that had stumped the department. He had been a fan for a long time. This wasn't a phase, it was a career. The details he gave were undeniable. Details that only the killer and the investigators could have known. The Void had been hungry for much longer than they realized. Vance's hand moved to her radio. The room was no longer just an interrogation. It was a historical record of a monster's evolution. Daniel was finally immortalized. "So," he asked Vance, "does this make me a fan favorite? Or am I just another episode you'll forget by next Tuesday?" Daniel had found his answer. He was the story. The experiment was over. The participant was in a cage. But the curiosity he'd ignited in the public was just beginning to burn. The curiosity killer was born. The confession went viral. Millions watched the clip of Daniel's cold, arrogant eyes. They studied him, just as he had studied others. The cycle was complete. But there is one thing Daniel didn't tell Vance, a secret he kept for himself. Are you curious enough to find out what it is? Next time, the final secret. The story isn't over until the last word is whispered. Stay curious. The Curiosity Killer trial was the ticket of the year. People lined up for blocks just to get a glimpse of the fan who became the fiend. It was a circus of his own making. The prosecution was relentless. They didn't just have the confession, they had his history. Thousands of searches, bookmarks, and forum posts all pointing to this exact moment. He wasn't a fan, the prosecutor argued. He was an apprentice. He was training for this for years. Daniel's digital footprint was the smoking gun. Daniel loved every second of it. He was the center of the world. He even caught himself correcting the prosecutor's timeline during a cross-examination. His arrogance was chilling. The defense tried a radical approach. True crime dissociation. They argued Daniel was so obsessed with the genre that he lost the ability to distinguish reality from narrative. He wasn't killing a human, the psychologist claimed. In his mind, he was completing a storyline. It was a desperate plea for a reduced sentence, but the jury wasn't buying it. For the family of the victim, there was no dissociation. There was only the void Daniel had left in their lives. Their grief was the only real thing in the room. The jury didn't take long, 6 hours of deliberation for a lifetime of consequences. Daniel stood as the foreperson read the word that would define the rest of his life. Guilty on all counts, first-degree murder. The cold case confession added another life sentence. Daniel's experiment had earned him a permanent place in the archives. He didn't flinch. He didn't cry. He just looked at Detective Vance and mouthed 3 words that only she could see. A message from the abyss. What did he say? Vance wouldn't tell the press. She wouldn't even tell her partner. But she spent the next 3 nights awake, staring at the evidence board. Daniel was gone from the public eye, but his story was now a permanent part of the true crime canon. He was finally a legend. But legends always have a darker side. Because Daniel's experiment wasn't just about killing, it was about something much, much bigger. Something he had hidden in plain sight. As the news cycle moved on to the next tragedy, Vance realized that Daniel hadn't stopped. Even in a cage, he was still directing, still curious, still in control. The trial was over, but the true horror was just beginning to surface. Are you ready for the final chapter? The reveal of the 3rd victim. Next time, the final reveal, the secret Daniel kept for himself. The experiment isn't over until the last shadow falls. Stay curious. Detective Vance couldn't sleep. The verdict was a victory, but the Curiosity Killer was still winning. The message he'd mouthed haunted her. Check the basement. Vance went back to Daniel's house, not the bedroom, not the kitchen. She went to the basement, the place forensics had cleared twice. She was looking for what they missed. Behind a false wall, she found it. Not a weapon, not a trophy. A stack of hard drives, meticulously labeled. Daniel wasn't just a killer, he was an archivist. The drives contained thousands of hours of footage. Daniel hadn't just committed a crime, he had directed a documentary. And he had a cinematographer, a partner in curiosity. The person behind the camera was revealed in a reflection. It was Mark, Daniel's younger brother, the quiet one. The one who had been Daniel's most loyal fan his entire life. It was a shared madness. Daniel provided the vision. Mark provided the record. They weren't just brothers. They were a production team for the end of the world. But then the final reveal surfaced. The cold case Daniel had confessed to, he didn't do it. He'd used his knowledge of true crime to fake a confession so perfect it fooled the experts. Why fake a murder? Because Daniel knew that a serial killer gets a book deal. A one-time killer is just a footnote. He wanted to be a legend. He wanted to be legend. He wanted to see if curiosity could build a lie. The experiment wasn't about the kill. It was about the reaction. He wanted to see if he could manipulate the entire justice system into believing a story he wrote, and it worked. But Mark was gone. As soon as the verdict was read, the partner vanished. He took the master drives with him. Daniel was in a cage, but the record was still out there. Vance realized the horror. Daniel hadn't just committed a murder, he had created a franchise. Mark wasn't just a partner, he was the sequel, and the sequel is always bloodier. The experiment is continuing. Somewhere, Mark is watching. Somewhere, the curiosity is being fed. Daniel is the star, but the director is still at large. The secret Daniel kept? He didn't want to kill the victim. He wanted to kill the fan. He wanted to prove that curiosity is just a polite word for a monster. Are you still curious? Are you still watching? Because the final chapter is about to begin, and you might not like how it ends. Next time, The Legacy. The final words of the curiosity killer. Stay curious, if you dare. Daniel didn't fade away. In the sterile quiet of maximum security, he became a god. Thousands of letters poured in every week, not from haters, but from curious minds. His fan base wasn't just obsessed with his crime, they were inspired by it. Daniel had proven that in the digital age, a monster is just a brand waiting to happen. But the true horror wasn't in the letters, it was in the dark corners of the web. Daniel hadn't just faked a confession, he had founded a community, a private, encrypted network of participants. The experiment was a recruitment drive. He wanted to see who would look at the abyss and blink, and who would jump in. Mark wasn't just his brother, he was the first moderator. "You think I'm the only one?" Daniel told Vance in their final unrecorded meeting. "I just provided the blueprint. The fans, they're the ones building the house." 6 months after the verdict, Detective Vance returned home to find a package. Inside was a single high-capacity hard drive and a note, "For your curiosity." Vance plugs the drive into her laptop. A folder window opens. It contains hundreds of video files. The first one is titled, Episode 1, The New Student. Daniel didn't keep a secret. He shared it. He taught the world that curiosity doesn't have to be passive. He proved that everyone has a price for fame, even if that price is blood. So I have to ask, why are you still watching? Are you studying the crime? Or are you just looking for your own curiosity? Daniel is waiting for your letter. The experiment is complete. The results are in. Curiosity didn't kill the cat. It turned it into a tiger. Stay curious. Stay very, very careful. This is the end of Daniel's story, but the network is just getting started. Are you ready for season 2? Because it's already being filmed. True crime fan committed a murder out of curiosity.